Welcome to the Discovering Eden podcast. My name is Brandon.
I'm Jonathan.
I'm Marty.
And, well, you saw our show last week. It was interesting. We couldn't even get the intro down. But this week, much better. Did it much better.
And I'm Jonathan.
Or so we thought. But this week we're getting into the dragon conversation, which I know we all like. Obviously, it even has a whole game on it. It's called Dungeons and Dragons, if you haven't heard of it. But dragons themselves have been around for who knows how long. It's in like every mythology across the globe. Mm-hmm. So clearly there's something about it that sparks the imagination, yet also has to have some roots in something.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about what some of that something could be. Yep. So right before we get into it, we'll pray, get into the bumper, and then get right into it.
Dear Lord, we just thank you for this time to be able to come together and talk about these things that interest us. As we dive into this discussion today, I just pray that you guide our words, that you guide our thoughts and our actions, and just bless this conversation and allow it to be fruitful, informative, and fun. We just thank you again for this time. Amen.
Amen. All right. Let's go to the bumper. This time I know where it is. So, without further ado, the bumper. All right. So actually, we're going to start exactly what we talked about as the bumper was showing. So when you think of a dragon in popular media, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I mean, I joked about it during the bumper, but Charizard, but my mind also jumps to things like Smaug.
But that's not a dragon.
Yeah, I know, he's Firefly. Doesn't count. Controversial.
Just like Gyarados also isn't a dragon type.
Should they have been? Yeah, probably.
No, but they have to make certain other things dragon types that...
Come on, we don't need balancing.
They call Turtonator a dragon.
Yeah.
No, it's a turtle. That is a turtle. Why does that get a dragon typing? I know turtles are old, but that doesn't mean it's a dragon. I mean, where's the wings? Anyway, kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier is kind of where is this origin of where dragon itself comes from? We learned last week, around 1842, that the term dinosaur was coined. But when was dragon coined? So in the English language, at least, we have a definitive date. Or at least somewhat of a definitive date.
Mm-hmm.
So the term dragon was coined from the Greek word drakon, meaning for poisonous breath, and a huge serpent, and also borrows from Draco, which is Latin in origin. And there's different names used to describe dragons before ultimately being termed dragon in an English bestiary in 1220 AD. And these other names being serpent, drake, great serpent, and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So some of these things that you're going to see in some of these older mythologies denote serpents, great serpents, drakes, fire drakes, different things, like they're dragons.
Yeah.
And again, some of these other things can also be synonymous with dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
So, as dragons, as we kind of learn to figure out, are your stereotypical dragon is what you would think of as your typical East or your typical Western European dragon, which is you have 2 wings, 4 legs, it flies, it breathes fire, it's scaly, and eats things.
Yeah.
And sometimes hoards treasure.
Smog style.
Yeah.
And it's your typical depiction of what a dragon is in those connotations.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other types of things also denoted as dragons. Some of them have no wings at all, have 4 legs. To me, that's more indicative of the dinosaur, but I digress. Some of them have 2 with wings,
Mhm.
2 legs and wings. Typically, that's what you would think of a wyvern. So more your worm-like thing here. And then you have worms, which, well, they don't have any legs, but they're still technically dragons. And sometimes they have wings, sometimes they don't. They're still worms. Also, I thought this was interesting too. There were things called flying snakes. And you see these, you especially see them in the Egyptian, like hieroglyphs and different things like that. You see snakes with wings. Now, whether that is more of a religious affiliation with it, oh, that means of the heavens, they're more holy or maybe unholy, or is it actually based in something that we're actually seeing around? Interesting. Again, more serpent-like. Those look more like snakes to me.
Yeah.
So more you're flying actual snakes instead of your depiction of more of a dragon. But it's interesting, nonetheless.
Yeah.
And then the furthest back I could find upon researching for where this dragon idea came from, or I say idea, but where this mythology kind of started was all the way back in Mesopotamia, like 4,000 something years ago, in the ancient civilization of Sumer. So you have Sumerian Usumgal, and I'm probably going to be butchering all these names. You have Anzu, and you have, we'll call him Mushi, just because it's much easier to say.
Mushusa?
Mushushu, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Mushi. And those are interesting things. Like Anzu, for example, is like an eagle with a lion head breathing fire and water.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, also referred to as a demon,
Okay.
which is fitting.
Yeah.
And you'll see even in Western traditions, dragons typically take up more of a demonic nature, like they're associated with demons.
Yeah.
You even see that in the Bible, with the Book of Revelation, with the dragon that is mentioned in the Bible being a depiction of a demon.
Yeah.
So, obviously, some of these depictions I think are a little bit more on the they're very exaggerated, and they're not necessarily based on something legit, but some are, I think. Now, obviously, it's kind of hard to say what is what, because they vary substantially through all different iterations of what we see in dragons.
Yeah.
Dragons take on many shapes and sizes, which lead me to believe they could be a separate thing other than dinosaurs. Much like how you have the pterosaurs. They were their own separate thing. Or your mosasaurs, separate thing.
Mm-hmm.
Dragons could be a subsection of dinosaurs that just simply took flight.
Yep.
which is interesting. And kind of like what we were talking about last episode, and I know I talked about it way too late, with the bone structure. But the hollow bones, which allow for flight, in some of these birds that would eventually take more of these avian features, some of these light bones allow things to take flight, which include bigger animals. Obviously, some of the larger wingspans that we know of on the planet today would be like your condors, or technically the largest that we know of in modern culture today is the albatross with the largest wingspan. They more soar, so they take updrafts and stuff like that. Dragons, I feel like, would be much the same. To take into consideration how much uplift you would need to carry something of that size, you would need pretty large wings to be able to actually soar and actually get the updraft. Are they going to be flapping their wings like a hummingbird? No! And that would be horrifying if you saw a dragon flapping their wings like a hummingbird.
Now I kind of want to introduce one into a D&D campaign.
That would be interesting.
I got a few players to scare now.
Don't touch it. Don't touch it. Why? There goes your arm.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because scientifically, it makes sense. You would have to be massive. Like, your wings would have to be enormous to get something of that size up.
Mm-hmm.
So something the size of what your stereotypical dragon is, which is relatively large, makes sense. The only thing that doesn't add up is what prey would they be eating?
Yeah.
Everything that we know of today kind of shrank. With the biggest things being like elephants and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So, in that regard, what's our percentage of dragons as we know them existing today?
As we know them?
Yeah.
0?
Yeah.
And I would also agree and say 0. Now, what's the chance they may have existed in the past? For me, I'd put like a 75%.
Yeah, taking on a more like serpentine type of thing, I could see that as a much higher, non-zero number.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I will say a lot of what is demonstrated as dragon in a lot of different iterations, I think more equate to dinosaurs. So they definitely existed, they're just not their own separate thing.
Yeah.
I think there's a 75% chance that they were their own separate thing. Or even potentially related to, like, the pterosaurs, for example, who adapted flight. So, this is a dragon, as we know it, and more of a Western depiction of it. They spit fire from here, and they have kind of like your more bat-like wings.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily the case in all these different depictions.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the first one in Sumer, they were feathered. They didn't have bat-like wings.
Mm-hmm.
They were feathered, much like an eagle.
Yep.
Which to me makes a lot more sense. But it also could be a distinction of the different types. So some may have taken after more of the pterosaurs, which did have more bat-like wings. And we know that. And some may have taken more of the avian bird-like forms. Which is why I think the distinction between griffins and dragons are very, very similar, because I feel like they could have been the same thing.
Makes sense.
Because they're both often depicted with like lion head features,
Yep.
with like an eagle body, or something of that nature.
Yep.
So, to me, that's one of the creatures that I think definitely could have actually existed. We just don't see it around.
Yeah.
Because, well, their prey's gone. Because humans, they only have so much fiber and meat on the bones. They're not no woolly mammoths or big old Apatosaurus, those things are gone. And honestly, probably the dragons and, your T-Rexes may have been competing against each other if they were indeed different. And once, those big fauna were gone, well, bye-bye dragon.
Right.
And the only dragons that you kind of hear of as the last remaining bits are they were killed for sport. And, well, not necessarily for sport, but for glory.
Yeah. It's pretty much every myth out there.
Where, well, sorry, Smog.
Yeah.
You got smote. But they leave for good stories, though, I will say. So I'm probably going to bring this up before I forget again, because I will. I'm going to start going into here, and then we'll go into the different types, I think, of what I want to do here. So I'll go in here real quick. So boom, look, it's the slideshow again. Isn't that fun? This time I'm a lot faster. So this is the flag of Wales. So this is an actual flag of a place in the world.
Yep.
Now, if that is not a dragon, I don't know what it is.
I told you before what I thought it was.
It's a chicken.
Yeah.
It's definitely a chicken. Or is it a lobster chicken because it's red? It's cooked.
There you go.
How many dino nuggets can you get out of that one? So like I was saying before, it's typically scaly and winged. Bat-like, but also can be feathered. It has 4, 2, or no legs. And often breathe some sort of, I guess, affiliation with an element of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's fire, poison, some of them have electric, some of them have wind, some of them have water, and then some of them have other things like cold or ice. But that I feel like is more video game.
Oh, it's very D&D.
Because or video game or other things like that, because I have yet to actually find one of cold. The only thing I could think of cold is wind related, which is wind related, not actual ice.
Frost breath kind of thing.
But all the other stuff I actually did see, and we actually do see in actual nature. The fire is a little bit of a, well, maybe, with the Bombardier beetle. For example. Is it fire? Well, not really, but it's a chemical reaction.
Close enough.
But you have electric eels for electricity. Basically, any serpent has poison, whether that's a lizard, reptile, snake. Poison, that's pretty much to go without saying. Wind makes sense if, it's flying. Poof, wind. Yeah. There's different aspects there. They're often observed with horns or spines, much like other lizards. And I think of also the dinosaurs here, because a lot of them were horned and different. They had defense mechanisms.
Yep.
Or you even look at the crocodile skink that we talked about last episode. It has all these different features, often why it's also called a dragon. Like, it's a little dragon.
Right.
A little buddy.
Yeah.
Often this would symbolize greed, chaos, evil, a demon. Yet there are also some good dragons and depicted as wise, which is a little interesting because some people, they take the side of dragons. I like them.
Yeah.
I don't like when they're villainized because I think they're cool.
Yeah. What's fascinating to me, at least in the bit that I read on the different types of dragons and then, what side are they on, good or evil? Like, it seemed like the Western dragons were, 95% of the time more like that evil side.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, the Eastern dragons, that's kind of a 50-50 mix. Like, they'll tend to be more, like, kind of good-natured or whatever, but, yeah.
Yeah, and then, obviously, they're most well-known during those Middle Ages, kind of around that 1220. depiction, and when it was literally in the bestiary.
Yeah.
Which means they could have still been around at that point in time. But I always think it's interesting. I'm going to go back for right now. We will go to the other ones from pretty soon. I'm just going to cut this off for currently. Now, I wanted to get through that because I think it's interesting. Plus, I always thought the whale's flag looked cool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a dragon.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Any country that wants to put a dragon on their flag, they're doing something
Already, you got my brownie points. They're already yours. Have them all. Actually, I'm actually going to go back, so maybe this is weird, but I'm going to go back to the slideshow real quick. Whoa, look, we're back. Whoa. So I'm going to quickly go here, actually. So we already talked about this earlier with Anzu, Usumgal, and Mushi here. So the one on the left is Anzu. I couldn't really find anything for Usumgal, so it's not there. But Anzu, and I was talking about this a little earlier, like, it looks more griffin-like to me, but it has those scales, the wings. It has that dragon look, but it's more the feathered wings. Which this is like the first depiction of what a dragon is. Now, for me, it makes more sense that they would base this off of an actual existing animal that is living to come up with some of these things. So, for me, the chance of some of the, like, an actual dragon existing is higher than just what the myth itself denotes. So Mushi here was found on, this particular one is found on the Ishtar Gate of Babylon, made by King Nebuchadnezzar II. So, if anybody recognizes that name, well, it's also the name that you find in the Bible, King Nebuchadnezzar, who created the gate. And so you have, at least from what they have in the museum that I've seen, particularly in Berlin, where they have it, is they have three animals, three on one side, three on the other. They're mirrored. So you have a bull of some sort called, I had it somewhere. It's probably in the description on the slide, but it's a bull. It's an extinct species of bull that was native to that area. So it did exist. It was actually there.
Yeah.
Another one is a lion, which are still in that area. And you had Mushi here, which is interesting because the other two clearly existed. So then why wouldn't this? Would be my counterpoint to that. If the other two clearly existed and were still denoted as quote-unquote gods, how would this god be any different?
Yeah.
It's just a big puppy. It's got its tongue coming out a little bit. Maybe it's spoking fire. I don't really know.
That's kind of what I was wondering, if it was more fire kind of thing.
It has a red little tint at the end.
Yeah.
But what is it? That's what we don't know.
Right.
To me, it definitely takes on the thing of, I think it's legit. I think that's an actual animal. We just don't see it anymore.
What if it's the serpent that was made to crawl on the ground?
Maybe. And then he became real mushy.
Yeah.
And then obviously the argument for some of these is like, okay, well, why haven't we found fossil evidence of it? Well, especially if they're lighter boned. So let's say Mushy was lighter boned. Lighter bones typically don't fossilize. They crumble into bits and dust.
Yep.
regardless of how big they are. Like, how many fossilized albatrosses have you seen? Well, I haven't really seen a whole lot. And the only ones that we see are because we see them, well, dead.
Yeah.
And we get their skeleton. But a lot of these hollowed out bones don't get preserved. So the fact that we can even see some from some of these other things, like the pterosaurs, for example, means they had to have been in a really, really, really big place where all the oxygen is gone, and for some reason they didn't get ground into a powder.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I think something like a big flood, but maybe that's my bias because I'm Christian.
Yeah.
But this flood narrative is global.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
So something that can even fossilize some of these things, like, let's say, the famous example being the Archaeopteryx. How do you fossilize that with its feathers intact? You have to bury it quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean quickly. That doesn't happen. Like, it doesn't take millions of years or whatever. No, it happens instantaneously.
Right.
There's no way you can preserve it otherwise. So it's interesting in that way, and why I don't think we see a lot of these, bones. And obviously, some of these depictions of dragons were found like older dinosaur bones. Oh, that's clearly what this looked like, and this is what it looked like. I feel like they would have seen, or they've actually seen some of these walking around as they're making these descriptions. The fauna that was even 2,000 years ago, significantly different to what it is today. Humans have impacted the environments, for sure.
Right.
Climate is a part of it, but that's because we're coming out of global cooling with the Ice Age. We're just exiting that now. And everybody's like, oh, global warming. But I digress. It's not today's topic. But something that I think is interesting kind of goes back to the different types of reptiles that we see. And I'll exit out of here for right now and head back so you can see our lovely little faces. So, for example, you have your marine reptiles, your land reptiles, and your sky reptiles during the age of, reptiles. So your marine reptiles kind of look something like this. Your mosasaurs. Now this is a chronosaur according to the bottom of it. But stuff that look like this. And obviously you see this kind of in Jurassic World, eating a great white, a chomp. Yeah, they were that big.
Yep.
They were clearly the apex predators.
Mm-hmm.
Mosasaurs were fighting the Megalodon for the title there.
Yep.
They were massive. Absolutely massive. So you had your aquatic ones, and I think there could still be quite a bit of aquatic things still around, just unknown to science. Is there something as big as a mosasaur, for example? I don't know. And that's putting it lightly. We don't know anything really about the oceans. Obviously, we have our land reptiles, your dinosaurs. Everybody knows them. Everybody loves them, or at least we do. We love them. Not just as dino nuggets. We like them other versions. And then you obviously have your flying reptiles, or what later would be known as like birds. But it wasn't specifically just related to these. These were probably closer to dinosaurs than they were some of the other flying reptile relatives, the pterosaurs. Now, I don't have a thing of the pterosaurs, but the pterosaurs were kind of their own thing, and they could fly on their own. They didn't necessarily need to soar, though they often did. That's it for the flying reptiles. You got these guys, which are often smaller, and you got the pterosaurs, which are often bigger. Why is that the only ones? And I made a list of all the other ones for like aquatic and land. Obviously, land has quite a bit. So I didn't put all of them for the land there. But I'll go and look at some notable reptile fauna that I have. So for your land, you have turtles, you have snakes, crocodilians, geckos, small lizards, monitor lizards, iguanas, dinosaurs, just to name a little bit. And obviously there's subsections of dinosaurs and lizards and all these other things too.
Yep.
Some of the water reptiles. So you have your mosasaurs, like I was talking about earlier, your sea turtles, crocodilians, marine iguanas, sea snakes. So a lot of these similar, they go in both environments. Then you have ichthyosaurs, basically bigger fish, but we're technically reptiles. And your plesiosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit more than you would think, and like half of them you would say, oh yeah, they're not around anymore, or are they? Who knows?
Yeah.
They're in the water. The biggest 50-50 gamble ever. But yeah, for sky reptiles, yeah, you got your pterosaurs and then your protobirds. That's it. And to me, why couldn't there be another? Considering there's just as many flying mammals as there are flying reptiles. So if you call birds one of them, okay. Well, you have bats for mammals. And then I'm also counting gliding as well. So there's some lizards and whatever they glide. Called the Draco lizard. That's it, little dragon. But there's sugar gliders, flying squirrels, different things like that. There's even flying snakes that glide. They glide. They don't fly, but they glide.
Yeah.
They're called flying snakes, just like flying squirrel. They don't fly. They fall with style. But to me, it leaves an opening, especially with how the birds took to the air, and they adapted really well to it. Why couldn't there be really big ones? It just wouldn't be a bird at that point.
Yeah.
It's predatory. So not necessarily your hawks and other birds of prey like that. But taking on more of that reptilian side of that split, if you will, of that dinosaur split. Of the lizard hip, bird hip, whatever thing. Some had more beak-like, some had more reptilian-like features. Why can't you get something like this? Sure, it might be an amalgamation of some of the dinosaurs that we know of today. With the scaling and wings and teeth, everything there. But what if, like, Dimetrodon, for example, what if it wasn't a sailboat wings? It's just something to think about.
Yeah.
What if we misidentified some of these things? What if it was actually a wing, not a sail?
Which, I mean, has been known to happen with the fossil records.
Now, obviously, I can't recall if Dimetrodon had hollow bones or not, but I'm just saying it to make a point. We know there's some finned dinosaurs, or at least what we call finned dinosaurs, like your Spinosaurus, for example, your Dimetrodon, and Dimetrodon's more of your Triassic, early on dinosaurs. But why couldn't some of those have wings? Maybe they did have wings. Maybe they don't. I'm spitballing here. I'm making people think. Just like I always think, because I'm a nerd and I think about some of these things. Because dragons are cool. They could have existed. I think there's plenty of opportunity for them to exist. We just either misidentified it in the fossil record, or just truly didn't believe they existed in the first place, and just pass it on. Oh, that's myth. Oh, it's legend. Whereas I'm kind of in line with Tolkien and other people that think like him, where some of these legends have to have some base in reality.
Yeah.
They have to have been based off of something. You can't just throw a dart at the wall and say, yep, that's what it is. It's a giant floating marshmallow with eyes. We'll call it a puffin. What, puffins exist? Oh, darn it.
Yeah.
But it's something like that. Like, you can't just... Now, obviously, people are like, oh, they're just combining a bunch of different animals together to make this one thing. Okay, but then that doesn't explain why some of the other guys take exactly animals that you see even today. The exact form.
Yeah. Well, you look at, like, you know, manticores and chimeras, like those.
Those are your amalgamations.
Yeah.
Those.
Whereas a dragon is, here's a lizard that's just blown up, or a dinosaur, or a serpent, or something of that nature. You know, it's very much the thing it is.
Yeah.
Like, here's the thing. Like, percentage-wise, I give a dragon existing like 100 times more than a manticore, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, or a chimera, or anything like that, because an amalgamation of different things just doesn't work.
Right.
Whereas if it's either the same thing or just, I guess, a more expressed version of something, they're just explaining it with things that other people would know because they may have been more rare. You may not have seen them as much, which makes sense. If you're going to see a massive dragon, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't see a lot of them.
Yeah.
Because if you did, you probably wouldn't be back to tell the tale. But it's interesting. I've always been fascinated with dragons. I do think dragons themselves existed. Are they still around? I don't think so.
No.
Just because of the prey they have. Because, unless, I mean, maybe there's bigger terrestrial animals out there that we just don't know of. But let's say the ones that are over the sky. Yeah, probably not.
Right.
Are there sea dragons? And I'm not talking about the seahorses that are called sea dragons. But I do think sea dragons themselves could exist. Leviathan, I think, is a good example of what a sea dragon may look like.
Mm.
And again, it's in the water. Who knows? It's the biggest. I'll add 20% to whatever it is. Just because, who knows? But yeah. I'm like, even the thing that really makes me think that like the dragons existed. If bats can learn to fly, and they're mammals,
Yeah.
then dragons are much the same. And the thing that's similar with them, also that relates them to dinosaurs, birds, they all lay eggs.
Mm.
We know dragon eggs. That's something that is similar throughout. Birds lay eggs.
Yeah.
Dinosaurs lay eggs. And then there's the platypus.
Maybe a platypus is a type of dragon.
Maybe that's your cockatrice. Can it turn you to stone? Platypus just looks at you funny.
Wouldn't that just be looking at you then?
They are just like one of the most bizarre things
Right.
to ever exist.
And scientists still have no idea why that is.
Yeah.
They're just oddballs.
Yeah.
They are your
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much.
There's our real. We got that.
Like, okay, so you're trying to tell your buddy about a platypus
Yeah.
from who's never seen it before, and you try to explain it. That's how you get your exaggerations and people saying, "Oh, that surely can't exist."
Yeah.
Well, it's got a tail like a beaver, and it's got
got
a bill like a duck.
Yeah.
But it's a mammal and it lays eggs.
Yeah.
Huh.
Are you hallucinating?
Yeah.
Are you high? Are you drunk?
Yeah. And don't let the thing bite you either.
Yeah, it's tremendous.
Yeah, so it makes me feel like it's a lot more credible that something like a dragon could exist. Because how do you explain it to someone who hasn't seen it? Which, A, adds the rarity of dragons, because there wouldn't be that many out there by the times where humans would be around. Anyways, they'd be on the decline. Because the bigger fauna would be decimated and leaving.
Yeah.
Especially since, humans probably would have hunted the last of the big ones.
Right.
Like your woolly mammoth, for example. Now, let me go back to this so I can get my spot back. Okay, and then I think what we'll do is I'm going to briefly touch on Quetzalcoatl and pterosaurs. So, pterosaurs, we're in that region of like South America, North America. We know this from fossil record, but also I like even from folklore. Like even in the U.S., it was believed like one of the last pterosaurs was shot with a gun during westward expansion in like Tombstone, Arizona.
I think I've heard about that.
Which is something I found online. Now, whether it's legit or not, or if it's a cryptid thing,
Yeah.
I don't know. But either what it is, the sheriff ordered it to be shot down because they were scared of it. They're like, "What the heck is that?"
Yeah, we don't know what this is. Kill it.
And to be honest,
Welcome to human nature.
and to be honest, like pterosaurs, they're pretty much condors that I would think of. They would fit that kind of same niche. Well, the condors are allowed to come back because the pterosaurs aren't there no more. I mean, we almost hunted the condors out too. The California condor.
Yeah.
Or chased them out or whatever we did. Got rid of their environment. And especially during the westward expansion, well, no, it wasn't colonized at that point. So it was still free reign. So things were still allowed to exist. The only people that were there were the aboriginals. Your natives. And there, again, you have your depictions on petroglyphs and other things like that of things that you have no idea what any of them are.
Yeah.
Like even so I'm thinking of like Nazca lines. I'm thinking of some of these other things that they're just massive. Other people are like, "Oh, it's surely aliens." Because they're like, they don't know anything, they're stupid. They're not stupid.
Right.
They know what they're talking about, and they've seen things that we probably will never see.
Yep.
So some of these things could have been dinosaurs. Who knows? Pterosaurs, I feel like, would have lived longer than dinosaurs because they're in the air. They can feed on other things in the air. They're not required to sit in one spot. If things move, they can move to an island. They can do other things. They can move.
Yeah.
Eventually, well, humans will eventually reach out everywhere and things will eventually fall. We will take their habitat, all that kind of thing. That's just kind of the lay of the land. Humans have caused many of extinctions.
Yeah.
Whether you choose to believe that or not, we've definitely hunted things to extinction, either for the sport of it or whatever, like just the dodo bird, for example. That's a great example of, hey, it's stupid, let's kill it. Why? And why not? They're a bird. They're a big chicken. We love our dino nuggets. And then, they were known for being stupid, dumb birds. Look at Ice Age. Look at the movie. It turns into a roast chicken. That's about how dumb they were. And also why they just went extinct. Because they didn't fear humans, because they had no reason to fear them, because they didn't know what they were.
Right.
You knock one on the head and it dies, well, I mean, okay. They're not going to know any different. And then there they go. There they went.
Yeah.
It's one of the saddest extinctions we've caused, to be honest. They just did it because they could. But we have the Ice Age movies to remember the dodos by. What a lasting legacy. But yeah, so obviously there's serpent is definitely a way that you describe dragons.
Mhm.
Serpentine,
Yep.
snake-like. They're like, oh, there's a lot of similarities with snake and dragon. Why they could just be snakes, except snakes don't have wings and don't breathe fire, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe there is one. That'd be absolutely terrifying. But then I would call that a dragon. But there are some more serpentine, snake-like things with wings. One of them you see is Quetzalcoatl. Now, obviously, Quetzalcoatl is a Mesoamerican myth. It's a god, anthropomorphic. As a lot of these gods in these mythologies are,
Yep.
but they take an animal form. It's interesting when these animal forms take things that we don't necessarily ever see. Like some of them do. Like, for example, Egyptian goddess Hathor takes multiple different forms of different animals, but they're all animals that we know. The most common of Hathor being a cow. Well, we know what a cow or a bull looks like. Another one being a lion. We know what a lion looks like. But Quetzalcoatl is a dragon. Or a snake with wings.
Yeah.
Now, wings are put on a lot of different things. Even in Egypt, for example. Wings are put... Like, they have snakes with wings there. It's not any different. But that's also what makes it interesting, where they have snakes with wings, but you see them all over the world as well. Snakes with wings.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, let's take a look at Quetzalcoatl here. As I get this ready and forget to do this. So, this is Quetzalcoatl, and I obviously have a little bit more down there. I'm not going to get to it, but we have it. So, obviously, you have more of an artist rendition on the bottom here of what Quetzalcoatl may have looked like. To me, that's your Rayquaza of Pokemon.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's your feathered serpent-like thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's long, and this is why they're called serpents, because they look like snakes. They're just bigger snakes with wings. So is it really a snake? Well, not really, but what else would you call it? So, feathered serpents appeared in several Mesoamerican cultures, not just the Aztecs, which is where Quetzalcoatl comes from. You also have Kukulkan, which is Mayan, but it's pretty much the same thing. And there's other serpents in here as well, not just Quetzalcoatl, such as the Vision Serpent, and I'm not going to go into super deep detail here. And then going back to the Nazca lines, you see a bunch of different things. It's not necessarily dragons, but you see other, and these are massive things too, not little. So this would be more of your depiction of what it is on the thing. these are more images as well. Like, what is that? That doesn't look like a snake to me. What snake has eyebrows? Long tongue, but that's serpentine.
Yeah.
And I think even dragons and dinosaurs themselves, to me, I always pictured them with like forked tongues, just like
Sure.
any lizard that you see today.
Yep.
So to me, that makes sense. So this is what I think Quetzalcoatl could have been. It could have been a pterosaur of some time, or it could have been its own thing. Obviously, I referenced Tombstone, Arizona there. Whether that's legit or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But to me, I don't put it out of the realm of possibility because it was still Wild West at that point. It was called the Wild West because we didn't conquer it. Nobody did.
Right.
That's why, like, some places like the Great Frontier are places that we just haven't touched. So that's why things of massive size could still be out there. They're just in places we haven't taken over. Places like Alaska, like I had on some of these other things. They're just colder environments, so they would be more adapted to these environments.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Wild West isn't as cold. It's just interesting. So some of these things
Yeah, and one
are
of
really
the,
different.
I mean, even with Quetzalcoatl, kind of an interesting thing on that too is at some level it is an amalgamation in the name itself. So Quetzal means snake,
Mm-hmm.
and then Quetzal is a type of bird, and you look at the picture of it, and what is it?
The
You know,
snake
the
bird.
snake bird, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, how would you explain this to people outside? Well, you would explain it in the best way you know how.
Mhm.
And to me, it's kind of the way that I feel like as a Christian, God reveals things to us.
Mhm.
He explains things in a way that we understand it to be, not necessarily what they are.
Yeah.
They're probably something much more deeper than we can even fathom, but our minds can only process things that we have seen
Mm-hmm.
or witnessed.
Mhm.
So explaining some of these things to somebody who hasn't seen it before, how would you explain a rhinoceros to somebody? How would you describe that without showing them a picture?
Right. Yeah, big gray scaly thing with horns, like, you know.
Well, like, how would some of these things get turned into?
Yeah.
Like, I take that into consideration too. And we'll talk about this when we get to Leviathan and Behemoth
Mhm.
in the Bible as well.
Mm-hmm.
I apply the same logic there. How would you describe something to someone who hasn't seen it?
Yeah.
And some of the things that the Bible, like the study Bible I have, says it is, which I completely don't agree with, versus what it could be. And obviously it's speculative because we have no idea.
Right.
But obviously this is just the tip of the iceberg of dragons. We love these guys. These guys are fun. Next week we'll get into more. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but we'll get into some of the myths of Western dragons and look more into depth in some of these. So we have Fafnir, Ouroboros, some of these other dragons in the West, and kind of the reasons of why hunt them, why do that for sport. You have the Malta flag as well. I didn't get into that. That's a story on its own. But yeah, I think that'll be it for this video. Hope you enjoyed all these little fun little guys. And we will catch you next week.
See you later.
See ya.
Bye.